Hi, my name is Jess, I'm a professional artist and I'm going to show you my process of drawing Aerith from the Final Fantasy VII Remake game, and hopefully give you some tips along the way so you can give it a try yourself. So since I'm not getting into things straight away, here is a list of times if you want to skip my materials list or you are curious about a specific section. While materials are not everything, they can give you a little bit of helping hand and give your work that extra boost. If you're an aspiring coloured pencil artist, especially if you're going for realism, I cannot recommend this paper enough. The reason is that it's sturdy, it can handle a lot of layering and blending, and it doesn't have any tooth. Now if you're not familiar with what exactly that means, it just means the texture of the paper. The reason I tend to dislike using paper that isn't as smooth is because when I blend and add colour, there are still little pieces of white left on the paper and it ruins the illusion of a solid object for me. As for my pencils, I mainly use Faber-Castell Polychromos, primarily for the details of the face and the hair, because the lead is very hard and can be seen over layers of colour you've already put down. For the same reason though, I do not recommend them for blending and skin tones, but more on that in a bit. Now what I do recommend for skin tones and blending are a little bit more expensive, but in my opinion very much worth the price. Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils are fantastic for blending skin tones and have a perfect variety of colours to do so. The lead is also far softer than the Polychromos, giving it a solid, almost waxy quality that when you press down is perfect for skin. The Chinese White Derwent pencil is my holy grail for blending everything, from skin to hair to clothes, and you'll be seeing me use it a lot in this time lapse. It perfectly smooths out things in a way no other white pencil has done for me in the past. It is perfect for smoothing out your textures and adding highlights. Speaking of highlights, I find that normal erasers leave my papers creased and stained in a way that I cannot remove. I also find that they are too bulky to use without risking removing things that I do not wish to be erased. The Mono Zero eraser pen is fantastic, it has never marked my paper and its small tip is perfect for erasing with precision. I also recommend the use of white gel pens, but use it sparsely, for example in highlights in the eyes or the wisps of the hair. However, when you become more confident in its use, you can use it to create texture in your piece, especially with pores and clothes. Now one final thing that I'll say is that it's no secret that art supplies can get very expensive, especially in bulk, so make sure you get a pencil extender, preferably one that fits the brand you use the most, because when your pencils are expensive, you want to make the most of them. Now before you start adding any colour, you need to make sure all pencil is erased first. If you don't do it now, you will regret it later. So with the eyes, what I like to do first is outline everything in the colours I think I'm going to be using, not pressing on too hard though. A piece of information that changed everything about how I draw eyes is that the whites of the eyes are not white. We've been lied to. There can be a dark grey, blue, yellow, or even pink. Train yourself to look for the colours in the whites of the eyes and don't be afraid to use them. I always start the whites with a base layer of silver grey, a Caran d'Ache Luminance pencil, and go from there. With Aerith I added darker greys around the edges and a lot of peach and pink in the corners. If you think you've overdone it, go over and blend with the Chinese White Derwent pencil, and when you're happy, add really faint wobbly strokes of pink for the veins. Make sure the outline around your iris is a tad blurred. It's very rare you'll see one that isn't. To get a general gist of what I'm going to be doing around the eye, I start with a base of light flesh and Faber-Castell Polychromos, blunt and light. It creates a perfect texture to work on if you're working with lighter skin tones like Aerith's. Do not rush to add the details in darker sections, let it build up and be patient. You want to work on the shadows of the eyelid and underneath the eye before you add the eyelashes, and the same goes for the eyebrows, which I'll be doing after I've blended the skin there. The reason that I usually wait until I've blended everything is because if you do it beforehand, you risk ruining the colour of the flesh and making it this horrible grey colour, plus then you lose a lot of the detail. Hair, like eyebrows and eyelashes, tend to be really fine, really sharp, and you're going to lose a little bit of that if you choose to blend it afterwards. We're just repeating the process with the second eye with a gentle outline and a layer of light flesh. You might have noticed that when I was working on the iris, I put down a few base colours and then blended with Chinese white. What really brings an iris together though is the white gel pen highlight both of the lights of the eyes but also the edges of the colours if the pattern is prominent like with Aerith's. It is really easy to use a sharp pencil to tidy up the gel pen and dull it down a little if need be. Don't be afraid to make a few mistakes, you can usually rub it all off and start again. So what I've been doing here in the meantime is outlining the main features of the face with the same light flesh Polychromos pencil and adding a few new colours here and there, namely the olive brown 10% of the Caran d'Ache Luminance range. It might be helpful at this stage to outline the darker areas of the nose with brown at this point to make sure you don't lose the lines and accidentally alter the position of the nose. Now that you have the general shape of the cheeks and the nose outlined, work in some layers into the rest of the face. This might look a little odd with the nose and the lips not coloured in completely. Some people don't tell you that every drawing has an awkward and an ugly stage, and it's important to have faith in the finished product to keep going, even if you think it looks a little goofy. Try not to be too scared of adding in more garish colours at this point, like pinks and reds. Even orange if you can. Usually paler skin is a combination of pink, orange, yellow and brown, and sometimes even purple. Add in a few light layers and see if you like them. Even if you don't, it's fairly easy to fix with some other colours. Don't be too spooked if things look a little too saturated right now, because one thing you're gonna see when you use white to blend is that everything will look a little duller afterwards. You might even feel the need to work some of the colour back in. For the base of the lips, you're going to want to use the same base colour you've been using for the skin to make sure that it's blended well across the edges. Not a lot of portraits will have the lips as a sharp line, if that makes sense. And it's a really good way to make sure that the lips don't look goofy against the colour of the skin. When you've worked in some of the colour back into the lips, the white pencil again is a great way to work back in those highlights and make sure that they have the glisten that lips usually do, especially if you're drawing a woman. But if they're still lacking, then add some white highlights with the white gel pen. When you're at a point of where you're happy with the skin colour and the skin tone, you might want to give it another blend with the white pencil. Make sure not to press down too hard this time, but the first time, that's the time where you're going to want to press down your hardest to create that smooth texture of the skin. Now we're going to put the texture back in. Don't be afraid to go around in circles with a darker pencil around the nose and around the cheek area to create the illusion of pores. If you're feeling confident, use the white gel pen again to put light dots around the area of the nose, and sometimes you'll even find these across the chin. If that does go wrong, remember that you can rub them off. Just make sure to use a light pencil to do so you're not marking the paper. Hair can easily be one of the most challenging and time-consuming parts of any portrait, but try not to be too intimidated. Take it one step at a time. Step 1 is to use a base colour, the lightest colour you can see in the hair, in this case a dull yellow tone. We will use olive brown 10% for this, penciling in the general sections and directions of the hair. At this point, you don't need to worry about making the hair very neat or even about sharpening the pencil, but do press on a good amount when you're confident about the direction of the hair. Keep in mind that not all of it will be going in the same direction. I would recommend taking a good look at your reference first and noting where the darkest parts are. I find it helpful to use a dark pencil to draw them in as a guide as I go along. So you want to take the main colour of your hair, in this case walnut brown, and sharpen it. I find that once I've put down the base, it's a lot easier to follow the direction of the hair and harder to make mistakes. You might want to be a little light at first as you're figuring out where the highlights are in the hair. You will want to follow a gradient, and this is easiest when your pencil is at its sharpest. Don't worry at this point if your hair doesn't look particularly blended or smooth, we are going to be tackling that later. We will be using the Derwent Chinese pencil to smooth everything out. Always make sure to press down until you have a fairly solid look and there's no paper or paper texture visible anymore. Always make sure to follow the direction of the hair. Don't ever go horizontal or against the direction, even if it seems like it's the quicker option. It's always worth the extra time, I promise. After everything is blended, the colours will look a lot duller and the lines blurred. This is when we use the darkest tone of the hair, in this case black. You might also want to use a fairly bright colour on top, very lightly, to give the hair back some of its vibrance. Use a very sharp Chinese white pencil to pencil in some of the wisps of the hair, at the root and also over the top of the bulk of the hair. Lighter strands are essential for making hair look realistic, and this is the only time I will say to go against the general direction of the hair. So with braids specifically, it's important to make each strand follow a curve, each section usually in the opposite direction or at least a different direction. Take a good look at your reference so you know exactly where the hair is going. Since I'm at risk of repeating myself, I'll just let this section play out. Remember, base colour, darker colour, blend in the same direction, and then work back in the darkest tones. If you find yourself struggling with the last section or you make a mistake, blend it out again with a Chinese white pencil. It can work as an eraser of sorts, blurring out marks and allowing you to start again in a sense, so long as you don't do it too often. the jacket, it's all about building up layers. You do not want to blend too soon or you risk it not being vibrant enough, but don't be afraid to really pack on the colour with clothes. So long as it looks like a solid colour by the end, that's most of your work done. Since the collar is made up of leather, the aim is to make a smooth look with hardly any texture, and this can be achieved by using the Chinese white pencil for the highlights. Don't be afraid to really press down when blending this sort of material, but try not to overdo it on the darker sections, or the black won't show up on top of it. There is such a thing as too much blending, as much as I hate to admit that, and it tends to be a problem with clothes. One thing that has really helped me out with drawing clothes is the use of the white gel pen on the hems or the edges of the clothes. It is fantastic for highlighting stitches so long as it is tidied up and mimicking the little stray pieces of material on the edges, especially if you're drawing cotton or wool. I use it mainly to mimic the texture in the jacket, but it can be a little difficult to know when to stop, so try to only use it sparsely or you won't have a smooth layer to work with afterwards. Leave it until the end. Here I'm using a similar technique to the hair in that the pencil is only travelling in one direction and the shading follows the same pattern. It is only until after I've blended with the Chinese white pencil that I use a black pencil to create some horizontal lines, mimicking the texture of the jacket's material. When using a lot of colour like this, is it important to place something under your wrist so that you don't smudge any unwanted colours onto other parts of the paper. To an extent this is unavoidable, but it does make things a lot easier in the long run. Here we are repeating the same process of packing on that base red colour first, building it up a couple of times until it is very, very bright. Don't worry at these stages that there are parts of white peeking through, for once that's kind of what we want. Here we are building on the initial layers and adding the darker sections, making sure they are very, very dark against the red. Be careful at this stage and take many breaks because this can cause a lot of strain on the wrist. As mentioned previously, I use white gel pen to simulate the texture of material. Make sure to only use this sparsely and to make sure it is tidied up using only very thin lines of white. A good way to make sure things don't stand out too much is to place the pad of your finger on the gel pen whilst it is still wet. Only attempt to tidy it up once it's dry though.